Be me, Jessica Hartley, 31. Got my master's in gender studies in 2018. Spent 3 years doing HR at a tech startup before pivoting to DEI consulting when corporate America suddenly cared about that stuff. Built my client base during the 2020 protests. Companies were throwing money at anyone who could run a workshop and say the right words. I was good at it. Knew the theory, had the credentials, could spot problematic behavior from a mile away. This Bridgepoint contract was supposed to be my breakout case. Mid-sized construction firm, about 200 employees, recently acquired by some massive corporate parent that actually gave a shit about diversity initiatives. My job? Transform their outdated workplace culture. Easy money, great portfolio piece, and honestly, I was good at this. The annual company retreat was at some rustic lodge in the mountains. 3 days of trust falls and forced bonding, except I had the entire Saturday afternoon slot for my workshop. Deconstructing workplace masculinity. Third time working with these guys. First 2 sessions had been tense. Lots of crossed arms, defensive answers, the occasional eye roll from the older guys, but that was normal. Resistance meant I was hitting nerves, pushing boundaries. That's literally the job. I'd arranged the main conference room in a circle, took the staff 30 minutes to set up, and I could tell the guys hated it immediately when they walked in. They wanted rows, wanted to hide in the back, but circles forced vulnerability. That's the point. About 40 guys filtered in, dropping into chairs like they were heading to detention. I recognized most of them by now. Tom Reeves, the site manager, mid-40s, weathered face, the kind of guy who looked like he'd spent 20 years in the sun. Always respectful, but never actually engaged. Brandon Park, younger guy, maybe 28, usually tried to give diplomatic answers. And Rick Sullivan, 50-something senior project lead who'd made his contempt for these sessions pretty fucking clear from day one. Good afternoon, everyone, I started, smiling warmly. I know we're all itching to get back outside and enjoy this beautiful setting, so let's make this as interactive as possible. Silence. Standard opening, silence. I pulled up my first slide. Today we're exploring how traditional masculine norms shape workplace dynamics, often in ways we don't even recognize. I want us to dig deep, get personal, really examine where these patterns come from. Brandon raised his hand. Are we getting course credit for this, or? Some scattered chuckles. I kept my smile. The credit is becoming better colleagues and leaders. More silence. I tried a different angle. Let's start with a round robin. When you think about masculinity in your family growing up, what messages did you receive about how men should act? Guy after guy gave these sanitized, useless answers. Work hard. Provide for family. Be responsible. Nothing I could actually work with. One guy said, show up on time, and another said, don't complain. 40 minutes in, the energy was dead. I'd used 3 different engagement techniques and gotten nothing but the bare minimum. I could feel the session slipping away. I made a decision. Sometimes you have to create a breakthrough moment, shake people out of their comfort zones. I turned to Tom. He was sitting with his arms loosely crossed, expression neutral. Tom, you've been pretty quiet. Can you share about a time you felt pressure to perform masculinity at work? Not really, he said. Come on, there must be something. This is a safe space. I'm good, thanks. The room was watching now. I felt the resistance crystallizing, and I knew if I let him off the hook, I'd lose what little ground I had. Let me reframe, I said, softening my voice. When did your father's expectations impact your emotional availability? How did that shape the kind of leader you became? Something shifted in Tom's face. Just a flicker, but I saw it. My dad died when I was 19, he said quietly. So I'd rather not. The room went cold. Like, actually cold. I felt it in my chest. Oh, I said, and I should have stopped there. I should have apologized and moved on. but my brain was in workshop mode, and workshop mode doesn't do silence. And isn't that tragic? That toxic masculine culture made him feel he had to risk his life to provide, and now that pattern of... Rick stood up. Just stood, chair scraping loud against the floor, and walked out. Then another guy got up. Then 3 more. Tom was staring at me with this expression I couldn't read. Not anger. Something worse. Disappointment, maybe. "We done here?" someone asked. I looked at the clock. We had 40 minutes left. We should really process what just... But guys were already filing out. Brandon gave me this apologetic shrug as he left. Tom was one of the last, and as he passed me, he said, "You should have read the employee files I sent you." Then I was alone in a circle of empty chairs, my PowerPoint still glowing behind me. I told myself it wasn't a big deal. People walk out of difficult conversations. It means you're challenging them. That's growth. But my hands were shaking when I packed up my laptop. I sat in my rental car in the lodge parking lot for 20 minutes before driving back to my room. Kept replaying the moment, Tom's face when I brought up his father. The way Rick had just stood up without a word, like I wasn't even worth arguing with. I pulled out my phone and started typing an email to my grad school advisor, the one who'd encouraged me to pursue consulting. Had a breakthrough moment today, really pushed past some resistance. Stared at it, deleted it. The lodge felt different walking back, past a group of guys from the session at the bar, laughing about something. They went quiet when they saw me. Not hostile quiet, just done with me quiet. 2 weeks later, I was back at Bridgepoint's main office for our mandatory follow-up session. Monday morning, 9 a.m., conference room B. I'd prepared extensively for this one. New PowerPoint titled, "Moving Forward, Building Trust After Difficult Conversations," a carefully worded opening that acknowledged the challenging moment at the retreat without actually apologizing, because apologizing would validate their reaction. I got there 15 minutes early. By 8:55, 30 guys had filed in and taken seats. Perfect attendance. That was unusual, but something was off. They were too compliant, too organized, all sitting up straight, hands folded on the tables in front of them, faces completely neutral. No coffee cups, no phones out, no side conversations. Just 30 men, sitting silently, waiting. "Good morning," I said, trying to inject energy into the room. "Thanks for being here. I know we had a rough moment at the lodge, and I want to use today to rebuild and move forward together." Silence. So let's start with a question. What does accountability look like in this space? More silence. Not awkward fidgeting silence. Not hostile silence. Just nothing. 30 pairs of eyes looking at me or slightly past me, expressions blank. I waited. 30 seconds. Felt like 5 minutes. "Anyone? Brandon, you usually have thoughts." Brandon met my eyes. "No, ma'am." "Mom." He'd never called me ma'am before. "Okay," I said slowly. "Tom, how about you?" "I'm good," Tom said. I tried 6 more questions. Got nothing. Moved to my PowerPoint, slides about restorative dialogue, active listening, creating brave spaces. Read through them while 30 men sat like statues. "Let's try small groups," I said, probably sounding desperate. "Break into 4s and discuss. How can we communicate across differences?" They rearranged themselves into groups, sat there in clusters of 4, silent. I walked between groups. "Guys, you need to actually talk." Nothing. At one table, I stopped. "Rick, you clearly have opinions. Share them with your group." Rick looked up at me. "I'm listening to the presentation, ma'am." There it was again. "Ma'am." I felt sweat prickling under my blazer. This wasn't resistance I could work with. This was something else, something coordinated. I went back to the front, abandoned the small group exercise. "Okay, clearly we need to address what's happening here. You're all present, but you're not participating. That's not engagement, that's passive aggression." One guy raised his hand, middle-aged. I didn't know his name. Yes? Are we required to speak? He asked. Well, no, but the whole point of... So we're participating by being here and listening. Technically, yes, but... He nodded and went back to his blank expression. I tried a different tactic, made my voice gentler. Look, I know I touched a nerve at the lodge. That wasn't my intention, but we can't grow if we shut down every time we're uncomfortable. Studies show that men especially struggle with emotional regulation when faced with 30 stone faces. I checked the clock. We'd been going for 45 minutes. Felt like 6 hours. You know what? Let's take a 10-minute break. They filed out silently, orderly, like a fucking funeral procession. I stood alone in the conference room, staring at my useless PowerPoint, and felt something close to panic clawing up my throat. This was supposed to be my showcase contract. The thing I'd leverage into bigger clients, corporate speaking gigs, maybe a book deal. Instead, I was lecturing to mannequins. I caught Tom in the hallway during the break, dropped the consultant voice entirely. What the hell is this? He turned, unsurprised. What's what? This. The silence. Are you telling them not to participate? Nope. He started walking toward his office. I followed. Tom, come on. 30 guys all decide to go mute at the same time? He reached his office, hesitated, then gestured for me to come in. Closed the door behind us. You want the truth? He asked. Yes. After the lodge, guys talked. You went after my dead father to make a point about toxic masculinity. We decided we're done engaging. You want us in the room? Fine. Company says we have to be there, we'll be there. But we're not giving you ammunition anymore. I felt my face flush. That's not what I was doing. I was trying to create dialogue about how my dad's death was caused by patriarchy or some shit. Yeah, I got that. I was making a larger point about how cultural expectations... Jessica. He said my name like he was tired. My dad died because a crane operator fucked up a safety check. Not because of masculinity, because someone didn't do their job. But you needed it to be about your theory. That's not fair. You didn't even read the employee backgrounds I sent. You asked me about my father's expectations when my father's been dead for 26 years. You know how I know you didn't read them? Because it's literally in the second paragraph. My stomach dropped. I had skimmed those files, meant to go back to them. Look, I tried. I apologized for... No, you didn't. You said you acknowledged different perspectives. That's not an apology. Fine. I'm sorry. Can we move past this? Tom sat on the edge of his desk. Here's the thing. You keep saying we need to be vulnerable with you. Open up, examine our behavior. But you're not safe. The second we give you something real, you weaponize it. Tom's dad died. Perfect example for my slide about workplace culture. Everything becomes evidence for the conclusion you already decided on. This is a hostile work environment, I said, hating how weak I sounded. We're sitting quietly in a room, listening to your presentation. How is that hostile? You're deliberately sabotaging the session. We're doing exactly what you asked. We're present. We're listening. We're not arguing or disrupting. If that's sabotage, maybe the problem isn't us. I shifted tactics. I could talk to HR about this. Go ahead. Tell them we're too quiet. See how that goes. He pulled out his phone, tapped a few times, then turned the screen toward me. Didn't hand it over, just held it where I could see. A group text thread. 34 participants. Messages from the last 2 weeks. Silent treatment, session 3, pass it on. Confirmed. Not a word. She can't write us up for listening LOL. Finally found something she can't turn into a problem. Let's see her try to get promoted off this session. That last one hit different. Tom saw my face. Yeah, he said. We know this is about your career. That's fine. But we're not going to be your stepping stones. Not after you turned my father's death into a fucking teachable moment. I couldn't speak. The air felt thick. They're probably headed back by now, Tom said, pocketing his phone. You should go finish your session. I walked back to the conference room in a daze. They were already there. Same seats, same positions, waiting. I tried to power through. I really did. Put on a video about inclusive leadership. They watched silently, eyes forward. Tried a different approach, sharing my own story about facing resistance in previous roles, hoping vulnerability would inspire vulnerability. Nothing. At 11 o'clock, something in me snapped. You know what? This is exactly the problem. This right here. My voice came out sharper than I intended. You're also threatened by having to examine your behavior that you shut down like children. This is textbook fragile masculinity. You can't handle even the suggestion that you might need to grow. I was breathing hard, felt my pulse in my temples. Rick raised his hand. Finally a reaction. Yes, Rick? Can I be excused? I have a site meeting at 11:30. The hope in my chest died instantly. We're not done. The session ends at 11:30. It's 11:02. I'm asking to leave 28 minutes early for a work obligation. Am I allowed to go? Procedurally, I had no grounds to say no. The session was scheduled until 11:30. If he had work. Fine. Rick stood, pushed his chair in carefully, and left. Another hand went up. I also have a thing at 11:30. Then another hand. Another. I watched them leave one by one. Professional. Orderly. Each guy pushing his chair in, some of them nodding politely to me as they passed. That was almost worse than anger. The politeness. The careful respect that meant absolutely nothing. Brandon was one of the last to go. He paused at the door, and for a second I thought he might say something, break ranks, but he just gave that same apologetic shrug from the lodge and left. The guys who stayed, maybe 18 of them, sat like they were carved from stone. I tried to keep going, pulled up another slide, but my voice sounded hollow even to me. I was talking about accountability and brave spaces to men who'd found a way to make me completely irrelevant. At 11:28, I said, I think we can wrap up a few minutes early. The silence that followed was different from all the other silences. This one had weight. Finality. I looked around the room, 30 faces I'd studied in those employee files I'd skimmed. Brandon, who'd mentioned in his intake form that he was supporting his mom through cancer treatments. Rick, who'd been with Bridgepoint since he was 22, worked his way up from equipment operator. Tom, whose questionnaire had listed his hobbies as coaching youth baseball and woodworking. Real people, not case studies, not examples for my portfolio. Just men who'd found a way to make me irrelevant without saying a single word. I'd turned them into theory, and they'd turned me into background noise. Nobody moved until exactly 11:30. Then they stood in unison, like they'd rehearsed it, and filed out. I stood at the front of the empty room, my laptop still displaying a slide about building bridges through brave conversations, and felt something crumble inside me. My phone buzzed. Email from Bridgepoint's HR director. Hi Jessica, do you have time for a call this afternoon? Want to discuss the engagement strategy moving forward. Thanks, Michelle. I knew what that meant. That evening, alone in my apartment, I pulled up the original contract proposal I'd sent Bridgepoint. Read my own words. My methodology creates measurable culture change through sustained engagement and transformative dialogue. Participants report increased awareness, improved communication, and deeper commitment to inclusive practices. I thought about 30 men sitting in perfect silence. Thought about Tom's father, dead 26 years, reduced to a talking point I hadn't even bothered to fact-check. Thought about Rick's hand going up, and the hope I'd felt for half a second. I closed my laptop and poured a glass of wine I didn't want. The call with Michelle came 2 days later. They were concluding the contract early by mutual agreement. They'd pay me through the end of the month. They were going in a different direction with their DEI initiatives, had already hired a firm that specialized in male-dominated industries. Professional, polite, definitive. I said I understood. We thanked each other. I hung up and stared at my phone. 6-month contract, done in 3. No portfolio piece, No referrals. No case study about transformation. Just the memory of 30 men who'd found the one form of resistance I couldn't punish them for. 3 weeks later, I met Alicia at our usual coffee shop. Mid-afternoon on a Wednesday, the place mostly empty except for a few people on laptops. Alicia worked in marketing, had been my sounding board through grad school and every job since. Progressive, smart, always in my corner. So I survived the most toxic workplace I've ever experienced, I said, dumping sugar into my coffee. The construction company? They literally weaponized silence against me. It was psychological warfare. I walked her through it. The retreat incident, the coordinated silent treatment, the humiliating final session. Framed it the way I'd been framing it in my head. As a story of institutional resistance, of fragile men who couldn't handle being challenged. Alicia listened, stirring her tea. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. "Did you ever apologize?" she asked finally. "For the thing about Tom's dad?" I acknowledged that different people have different perspectives on... "Jess, did you say, 'I'm sorry'?" I felt something twist in my stomach. The point is, they should have been able to move past one awkward moment. I was trying to create space for vulnerability, and they turned it into this coordinated attack. But it sounds like... Alicia chose her words carefully. Maybe they didn't feel safe with you? Like, if I was in a training and someone used my biggest trauma to make a political point? It wasn't like that. Wasn't it though? The coffee shop suddenly felt too warm. So you're saying it's my fault that grown men can't handle basic self-reflection? I'm saying maybe your approach wasn't working, and instead of adjusting, you doubled down. I wanted to argue, wanted to explain how resistance is part of the process, how discomfort means growth, how you have to push boundaries to create change. But I kept seeing Tom's face, the moment when I mentioned his father's expectations and something died behind his eyes. "They sabotaged me," I said, but it came out weaker than I meant. Alicia reached across the table, squeezed my hand. Maybe. Or maybe they were protecting themselves the only way they could. I left the coffee shop 20 minutes later, Alicia's words circling in my head. That evening, I sat on my couch with my laptop open. I drafted a message for a professional women's group I was in, something about surviving a hostile work environment, about the unique challenges of DEI work in resistant spaces. My finger hovered over send. I thought about the group text Tom had shown me. She can't write us up for listening. The relief in that message, the unity. I closed the draft, opened a new tab, Googled DEI consulting jobs, scrolled through listings, saw phrases like experience with resistant populations and proven track record of measurable change. Saw salary ranges I couldn't command anymore, closed the tab, opened my email. The professional thank you from Bridgepoint HR was still there. "We appreciate your efforts and wish you the best in your future endeavors." Translation: don't use us as a reference. I sat there in my dark apartment, laptop glowing, and felt the weight of something I couldn't quite name. Not quite regret, not quite understanding. Just the uncomfortable awareness that I might have been wrong, settling over me like dust. I thought about Tom again, about how he'd said, "You're not safe," about how I'd heard that as an attack instead of information. My phone buzzed. Text from my mom. "How's the big contract going?" I stared at it, started typing, "Great, really transformative work." Deleted it, typed, "Actually, it ended early," deleted that too. Finally wrote, "I'll call you this weekend." I closed my laptop and sat in the dark, and for the first time in weeks, I didn't reach for an explanation that made me the hero of the story. I just sat with it. The silence.